Last week, Padma talked to us about the Buddha's universal teaching of metta. So he talked about how the teaching of metta sort of underlies the whole Dharma. It's a teaching for everybody. Everybody who practices the spiritual life needs to take metta seriously. It's not an optional extra. This week, we're going to talk about something slightly different, because when the Buddha, very often when the Buddha taught, he very much geared what he said to the particular person he was talking to. He took account of the temperament, conditions, the lifestyle of the person. And he was very clear that his Dharma was about how we grow. How we grow, and how we grow may be different for different people. It may be different according to where we are now. So the Buddha gave very, very individual teachings to individual people. This evening we're going to hear about 3, as it were, individual teachings that the Buddha gave to individuals. So to kick us off, Bodhinaga is going to talk about Nanda, this young chap Nanda, and his dove-footed nymphs. Very famous for his dove-footed nymphs. Anyway, we're going to talk about, Bodhinaga is going to talk about Nanda and the advice the Buddha gave to Nanda. Teaching, if you like, it wasn't just advice. And then Dayapurna is going to talk about a chap called Sigala, another young man called Sigala, and what the Buddha advised him to do. And finally, with a change from the published programme, because I've got a better idea, I am going to talk about the Buddha's encounters with a man called Vacha and what he taught him. So, first of all, Bodhinaga is going to talk to us about Nanda.
So I'm going to tell the story of Nanda, and it's a version of the story that comes from Sadaloka's book called Encounters with Enlightenment, which is a really great book, so I want to plug that book to start with. It's full of Sadaloka's favourite stories of the Buddha in his own words. So it's the version of the Nanda story from this book. So and the story starts about a year after the Buddha gained enlightenment, and so he's aged about 36, 37 at this time, and his life's changed very dramatically. He returns back to where his life started. He goes back to his home city, Kapilavastu, and he goes back to visit his family, his parents, and his home city. But he's a very different man, and this causes some mixed feelings for his father. His father's obviously pleased to see him, but a bit embarrassed as well by this person who used to be a prince now walking around with scruffy rags on, begging for food. And his father thinks, well, this isn't befitting. He actually approaches the Buddha and says, look, can you not just come and live at our house and wear some nice clothes instead of begging for food? This doesn't fit with somebody of your lineage. And the Buddha says, well, I'm a Buddha now, and my lineage is the lineage of the Buddhas. And all the other Buddhas have begged for food and wore robes, so that's what I do. So the king was still keen for the Buddha to kind of eat properly, to kind of come and eat with them. So they had a big feast coming up. It was a wedding feast, and it was the Buddha's half brother called Nanda. So the Buddha had a half brother called Nanda. It was his wedding day, and so the Buddha attended the wedding feast and sat beside Nanda. And Nanda was getting married to an especially beautiful young Shakyan girl. So the Buddha was from a Shakyan clan, the clan of the Shakyas, which is a warrior tribe, a warrior caste. And Nanda had been, presumably an arranged marriage, I'm assuming, but to a particularly beautiful Shakyan girl. And the wedding celebrations were in full flow, and the Buddha was sitting next to Nanda. And just in the middle of the celebrations, the Buddha got up from the wedding and passed his bowl to Nanda. He got his begging bowl and just put it in Nanda's lap, and there you go, just walked off. He just left the wedding celebration. So Nanda didn't really know what to do. He didn't know what to make of this. So he got up and he followed the Buddha to give him his bowl back. He went after the Buddha. And the Buddha just kept on walking, and eventually met up with the rest of his community. And so there Nanda was, and he was surrounded by the Buddha and his monks. And basically he was quite confused, Nanda, and he wasn't sure what to do. But the Buddha said, well, do you want to become one of my followers? And Nanda said, yeah, I think I do, actually. I want to become one of your followers. So Nanda became a disciple of the Buddha, and his life changed very, very much. It's my sense is the Buddha being very unconventional. He just not interested in convention at all. He kind of goes back to his old place. He's wearing rags, he's begging for food. And he just sees actually that a different life is possible for Nanda, and actually Nanda's got potential for great things. And he just places the bowl with Nanda and walks off, and leaves Nanda to work out what he's going to do. And Nanda follows him and becomes a disciple. So that's how Nanda joined the Buddha's clan, the Buddha's the Buddha's disciples. But it wasn't easy for Nanda, and about a year into his practice, it came to the Buddha's attention that Nanda hadn't really given up the attitudes of palace life. He was wearing robes, but he liked his robes to be finely pressed and ironed before he wore them. And rather than the kind of usual bowl that other people had, he had a glazed begging bowl. It was a begging bowl that was glazed, and he liked to wear oil on his eyes. So he'd taken up the spiritual life, but he really still, his heart wasn't really in it. It still kind of was used to the palace life. So the Buddha pointed out to him, well, you've left that life behind. And the rest of the monks, well, they don't wear pressed robes, they just wear rags that they find from rubbish heaps. So Nanda was finding, he tried his best to adapt, but he was finding it difficult. And he stuck at it. And a couple of years later, word got back to the Buddha. Nanda was basically thinking of giving it up. He'd had enough of the spiritual life. He just wasn't happy at all. So the Buddha called him over and to have a chat with him. He said, Nanda, I hear that you're thinking of giving up the spiritual life. Is this true? And Nanda said, it is, Lord. I am. And so the Buddha said to Nanda, well, why is it that you're thinking of giving up the spiritual life? And Nanda said, well, whenever I try to meditate, I just keep thinking of this beautiful Shakyan girl that I was going to get married to, and she got this lovely hair and these lovely eyes, and she said to me, come back soon, Prince, when I left with to follow you the begging bowl. And I just can't settle down to the spiritual life. All I can think about is this beautiful girl. So again, the Buddha didn't say anything. He took Nanda by the hand and transported him into a completely different realm. This is one of the cosmic stories, but it could just come from the Theravada, the Pali canon. And all of a sudden, Nanda finds himself in a heavenly realm. He's in basically a divine realm, a heavenly realm. And what you can see in front of him is 500 beautiful ladies, 500 nymphs are described in the text, with delicate dancing feet. Some translations call them dove-footed, which is, sometimes it makes you think they've got kind of bird's feet, but I don't think they had bird's feet. Some other translations say, well, very kind of delicate, dancing, beautiful maidens, basically, nymphs. And, Nanda's jaw drops. He doesn't know, he's very much taken by these beautiful maidens. And then all of a sudden, they leave the realm vanishes, and they're back where they were, back in the company of the monks where they were. And the Buddha says to Nanda, well, which is more beautiful, Nanda, the 500 nymphs or the Shakyan girl? And Nanda's in no doubt at all. He says, he's not very kind to the Shakyan girl, but he says the dove-footed nymphs are amazing. They're amazing. And so the Buddha said, well, I promise you, if you enjoy the spiritual life, you're guaranteed to have 500 nymphs, like there's 500 maidens. And so Nanda said, I certainly will enjoy the spiritual life. And so he basically gets down to practice. His whole mood has changed, his whole attitude has changed, and he wants to practice. He can't wait to get on and do the mindfulness and breathing and the metta and to get back on the cushion. So this is what he does. He gets, pours himself into the spiritual life, determined to get back into this heavenly realm and to be back with these maidens. And word gets around amongst the other monks, and they start to tease Nanda because they've heard he's only really practicing to try and get 500 nymphs. And but Nanda's not bothered. He wants to. He's really motivated. So he goes off and practices on his own. And I'll pause the story. There's an end to the story which I'll come back to when Sumati's going to give me a signal when it's time to wrap up. So I'm going to come back to the end of the story. But I want to just pause and say I really relate to the character of Nanda. For all kinds of reasons. There's the obvious reasons of kind of, just you know, there's a part of us which really thinks, well, I want to practice the spiritual life, I've made a commitment, I've even been ordained, I've been ordained as a Buddhist. But yeah, somehow, for some reason, I don't seem to be that kind of motivated sometimes to practice, and sometimes I feel like I'm in conflict, and part of me wants to practice, and part of me wants, you know, a lovely maiden, you know, shaking maiden or whatever it is, or you know, so it makes me think of we use the analogy on the intermediate course of the horse and the rider when we talk about emotions in the spiritual life. We say, well, it's as though we make a decision that what we want is to get enlightenment, and what we want is to be kind to people. But actually, what happens is there's a deeper part of us, there's these volitions we're not really conscious about, and they want something completely different. They just usually want sex or food or comfort, and that's what drives us without realising it. So we're left with a big problem actually. And Sangha Night calls it probably the biggest problem in the spiritual life is how to get our energies, our deeper emotions engaged in practice, how to get our energies behind our decision to practice. And our energies are kind of, they're either blocked or repressed, or they're wasted in kind of different activities. And we find ourselves kind of often, well, I find myself in what feels like a conflict, where I really, I've made this decision, I want to practice, but I find myself, it's often not motivated. And so what this story brings out for me is the importance of being motivated, actually finding something that will get you on the cushion, even if it's the promise of 500 maidens, if it's that's what it takes, and to get you on the cushion to meditate. Well, you need to find something, some kind of, well, you could say goal, but maybe that's not quite the right word, just some kind of motivation, inspiration, something that gets your energy going in the practice, something that helps you to connect with it. And initially it might be something very coarse and something not very spiritual or lofty that actually makes us want to practice. So that's the first point to make. And then the other point to make, you can see this episode as the Buddha taking Nanda into a kind of higher realm of being a metaphor for, well, that's what we need sometimes. Sometimes we need to enter into a bit of a more positive space, a higher realm, to get that inspiration. And sometimes that could be, coming to a Buddhist centre, meeting with Sangha, can be something that lifts us, it lifts our heart, it lifts our mood, and it gets us back in touch with why we want to practice. And also Sangha actually places a lot of emphasis on refining our energies, and he stresses engagement with the arts. You could see Nanda's trip to the heavenly realm and the dove-footed nymphs would be the equivalent of maybe going to Graves Art Gallery or the Millennium Gallery, and just spending time in a bit more refined space. So we need to be quite cunning as well with our emotions, and just think, well, how can we get our emotions, how can we attract them to the spiritual life? And then how can we start to kind of refine them and make them less coarse and more refined? And the other thing I think this story illustrates as well, it's important to have pleasure in the spiritual life. If you've got no fun in the spiritual life, you're not going to really be interested. So you need to find things in the spiritual life that you enjoy, that are pleasurable, that are fun. There needs to be play and fun in the spiritual life. Otherwise, you're just not going to want to do it. So you need to find ways to have fun and enjoy the spiritual life. And that was the key teaching really the Buddha gave to Nanda, is if you enjoy the spiritual life, you're guaranteed to get these beautiful maidens. So what happens at the end of the story? Well, I think the key thing to point out is that one of the practices I'm sure Nanda will be doing will be the Metta Bhavana, which is a practice that is a theme for us for this week. And through the practice of the Metta Bhavana, well, our emotions get engaged and our emotions get transformed. So Nanda started off with basically just lust and craving and desire for this beautiful maiden that he'd left behind. And through the practice of the Metta Bhavana, our emotions start to change actually. We start to stop seeing other people as objects for pleasure or things that we can possess and have. And we start to connect with the kind of deeper humanity of people. And we can start to, through the Metta Bhavana, we start to care for people more. We start to have concern for them. And they stop being, we stop seeing people as objects and more as human beings. And it's said that another name for the Metta Bhavana is that it's a Brahma Vihara. And the translation for Brahma Vihara is a heavenly abode. So actually, through practicing the Metta Bhavana, we enter a heavenly abode. What happens is the world becomes more beautiful. We start to see more beauty around us. People become more beautiful. And it's as though we enter a heavenly abode, a heavenly dwelling, through our state of mind changing. And another thing we cover on the intermediate course is how our states of mind create the world that we experience. So, yeah, basically by practicing the Metta Bhavana, we can enter into a heavenly realm where there will be dove-footed nymphs and maidens. But what happened for Nanda was interesting, is actually once he did the practice and he became established in the Brahma Viharas, he was no longer interested in the maidens, actually. He wasn't that motivated by them, actually. He became more interested in the welfare of other people and concern for other people. And basically his heart was liberated and he became enlightened through his practice, through the motivation of his practice. And the ending of the story is that Nanda went to visit the Buddha, and he went to visit the Buddha and said, I release you from your promise. I no longer want 500 maidens. And the Buddha said to Nanda, he smiled and said, well, I know, Nanda, when your heart was released from craving, I was released from my promise. So, yeah, so there's a happy ending that Nanda becomes enlightened, and the Buddha, is released from his promise. He doesn't have to provide 500 maidens for Nanda. So I think the real moral of the story is, well, through metta, through the practice of metta, the world starts to become more beautiful. Other people start to become more beautiful, and it's as though we're entering a heavenly realm, a heavenly abode. And basically, that's what happened to Nanda. Nanda was freed from suffering, free from his craving, and he no longer wanted the dove-footed nymphs. So just to sum up the whole, in a very brief story, I can really relate to Nanda in this. Is this person who's just in conflict. He's got this sense of wanting to practice his spiritual life, but he just can't. He can't really find the motivation to do it. And it takes something unusual from the Buddha to get his energy going. The Buddha has to speak in terms you could say, we use this horse and rider analogy, and you've got to speak the language of the horse. And the Buddha knew how to get Nanda motivated. He showed him something that would be possible in the heavenly realm, that would really inspire Nanda to practice. Actually, when Nanda established himself in the Brahma Viharas, that was no longer relevant to him. He was no longer in that space of craving and wanting other people. He just was, he appreciated people, so everybody's beautiful. So we need to find something that engages us to practice, but also be open-minded that what we want or who we become in the future might be very different from the things we want and the kind of person we are now. So a very interesting story, and one that I can relate to. So Nanda and the dove-footed nymphs.
So to turn that over, so you can see who I'm going to be talking about. And it's Sigala. From the sutta is called the Sigala and Vacha. It's in the Digha Nikaya. It's the collection of long discourses in the Pali Canon. It's not that long. It's about 9 pages, and it's very easy to read. It's beautiful, and I really recommend it. I love that sutta. So the setting is that the Buddha is at Rajagaha, which is now Rajgir, and he stays in the squirrels' feeding place in the bamboo grove. I just love that idea of a squirrels' feeding place. And he's up early and he's going on his alms round. And as he approaches the city, he sees Sigala, that's his name there, who is a young Brahmin. And that means he's from the priestly class, so they're very influential. And he's very wet. He's been doing some purificatory bathing, and so he's all wet. He's got wet hair, wet clothes, and he's very, very devout. He's got his palms together, and he's paying homage to the 6 directions. So he's bowing to the east, bowing to the south, bowing to the west, to the north, and then bowing downwards and up. And the Buddha asks him, what are you doing? What are you doing with this bowing? And Sigala answers him. He says that his father's dying wish was that Sigala would protect himself by doing this strange ritual. Well, it wasn't strange to his father. by bowing in each of those 6 directions every day, and that would protect him from any danger that might come from any one of those directions. So his father did this out of love for Sigala. But then Sigala says that he revered, honoured and held sacred this wish of his father. So there's obviously a real love between these two people. And then the Buddha says that he's not doing it in the right way. He says it's okay to do that. You can do this bowing if you want to, but it's not exactly going to do much good if you're expecting his practice to protect him. It just isn't really going to work. What's it going to do? He's not doing it in the right way. And so that's a cue for Sigala to say, well, how should I do it then? Teach me. So the Buddha can teach him. And the Buddha starts by telling him the importance. It seems that it's not got much to do with this, but he starts by telling him the importance of choosing the right friends, because how he lives his life is what really matters. It's what you do, what you say, how you treat people that really matters. How we speak, act, think affects other people. And then he goes on to make Sigala's ritual into something very meaningful. So he's turning what was an empty ritual. Sigala didn't really know, apart from that his father had told him to do this, what he was doing, why he was doing it. And the Buddha makes it meaningful. And he does it like this. So the Buddha goes through each of the directions in turn and relates that direction to different relationships in Sigala's life. So the East, he relates to mother and father. The South I think, is teachers. The West is family, your wife, or in a woman's case, your husband and children. The North is friends and colleagues. Below, this sounds a bit alien to us, but servants, workers, helpers. Above, ascetics and Brahmins. So very different relationships. Probably, I would imagine, most of the relationships that Sigala has in his life, all those people that he comes into contact with on a daily basis. And then the Buddha goes on to talk about the consideration and love and respect that Sigala should show through his words and his actions to each of these groups of people. There's not time to go through all that because it's quite lengthy. It's very, very detailed, but it's great to read. So he goes through things like skillful interactions, how you should behave with all these different groups of people. They're all slightly different, but they all have at their base, I suppose it's metta. It's just loving kindness as a base for each of these 6 directions. These 6 different groups of people. He gives Sigala very detailed advice about how to treat each of these groups of people. And he points out that in return, if they are treated with love and respect, they will give love and respect back. And then there'll be peace and harmony in all the directions, so that there won't be any need to worry about danger coming from them. And that's really what is going to protect Sigala. And everybody else come to that, because everybody's going to be living in harmony. I just love that. And so the Buddha points out the true worship of the 6 directions, says the Buddha, is carrying out one's duties with regard to these 6 kinds of relationships. And Sigala loves that. He says, may the revered Gautama accept me as a lay follower from this day forth, as long as life shall last. And then he becomes one of the Buddha's followers, becomes a lay follower. So I think what we need to think about is how this is relevant to us today. It sounds a bit alien, groups of servants and Brahmins and ascetics and bowing to the 6 directions. We don't need to do that. But I do think we can learn a lot from it. So there are 2 things that really stood out for me, but there's, I think, quite a lot more than this. I've only got time for a couple of things that really stand out. And one of them is this one about empty ritual. And the Buddha's he's made what he has been an empty ritual meaningful to Sigala. He filled Sigala's ritual with things that would help him in his life and which would also be helpful to other people as well, so everybody benefits. And one of the things that I'm aware of, one of the rituals we do very often is very simply saluting the shrine. And I know that if I'm not careful, I can just I can chant these words, and I'm not really thinking what I'm saying. And so I'm thinking, it's such a wonderful thing. What are we doing when we salute the shrine? We're revering the Buddha, our three refuges. We're revering the Buddha. We're revering the Dharma, his teaching. We're revering the Sangha. These are our refuges. And I took those on when I was ordained. This is where I'm going to refuge. I'm not going to refuge to other things. I'm going to refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And we did it when we become mitras. And this is our life as Buddhists, that those are our refuges. And so just thinking about what we're saying, giving our all when we're doing that little ritual, it's very short, but so meaningful. We're just reminding ourselves and rededicating ourselves to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And then the refuges and precepts. How often have I chanted the refuges and precepts and thought, I wasn't really thinking about what I was saying at all. And again, just really trying to notice what we're saying. Those are, again, the refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And then the precepts, those ethics which are so important to us and such a very central part of our life as Buddhists. So just two very little rituals that we do every day, and there are others as well, I'm sure you can think of others. So those are two little rituals that we could really, I'm determined, I'm really going to try every time. And if I'm at home doing these, and I notice that I'm not really concentrating, I'm going to stop and go back and start again and really think about what I'm doing and take my time. Maybe think about it. If I'm on my own, I can make that as long as I like. I could spend 10 minutes over saluting a shrine, just really thinking what I'm doing. So that was one area that I thought really stands out for me, making sure that my rituals are not empty and that they really are meaningful. And the other area that really stands out for me in that sutta is about our relationships and how we treat other people. And are we really relating to others, all others, with consideration and loving kindness and respect? Are we really bringing that into our relationships? Not just those that we want to be kind and nice to, but everybody, including those that we find difficult. So again, it goes back to Metta Bhavana as the Nanda. So I think this is very much at the basis of this. Just spreading out consideration, respect, love to everybody that we come into contact with. In our lives, not just on the cushions, but in our lives, really living it out. And I think that also then flows into gratitude, because if you begin to think, we don't need to think in those 6 groups particularly, but I think it's quite interesting to think to them in some ways. So, the parents, we start there, and it's not coincidence that they're placed in the east, because that's where the sun rises, and that's where we enter the mandala. It's like a little mandala, really, of relationships. That's where we begin, in the east with the sun rising, beginning of the day, and that's where we begin when we're born. Those are the first people that we come into contact with. Our mother, and probably first, and then our father. And then teachers in the north will go to school, will make friends, we will perhaps have wife or husband or partners and children, maybe not, but maybe we will. And then we work with people. Maybe we don't have servants anymore, but we certainly work with people. We may be in charge of people in work, or we may have people above us in work. And so there are all sorts of relationships that are very much like those that the Buddha was telling Sigala about. And you may think of more different sets of relationships too. And I think with so many of those, once I start to think about them, there's so much gratitude. What those people have given me, even people, perhaps especially people I find difficult. Just, I have so much gratitude for everything I've learned from them. And so that could just overflow into gratitude exercises, like that one that you do when you, I think it's probably, I don't know whether it, I can't remember now, is it the beginner's course or the intermediate course, where you make that list of people that you are grateful to. And you feel you could go on forever. And there's also another list that we tend to make. These are people that we don't necessarily know, but people who have made our breakfast cereal. I think I've often done that exercise, where you make a list of all the people who have had something to do with making your breakfast cereal, something like that, or everything that's gone into making this board, or anything you like, and how you see that so many different people are involved and have done so much for you. And so, you know, people we don't know as well, just total gratitude, I think, to so many people. Just wanted to finish, I've got a couple of minutes, haven't I? So I just wanted to finish with a quote from Bhante, from Sangha Night. This book, The Essential Sangha Night, which is really lovely. It's page 491, and the chapter is about friends and teachers. And this little section is about a network of relationships. I'll just read a little bit. May our communication with one another be Sangha. This reflects the very great importance that has always been given in Buddhism to the quality of communication, both between members of the Sangha and in the context of all the relationships an individual Buddhist has with other people. The Buddha had a great deal to say about communication, about the importance of truthful, kindly, meaningful and harmonious speech, and about the necessity to pay attention to one's relationships in general, making sure that one is relating in ways that accord with one's Buddhist principles. The reasons for this are quite obvious. To be human is to be related to other human beings. We cannot live our lives in isolation. Whatever efforts we make to develop as individuals are continually tested in the fires of our relationships with other people. However calm, kind and wise we may feel in the privacy of our own hearts or shrine rooms, the true test of how fully we have developed these qualities comes when we are faced with the realities of life as represented by the challenges offered by other people. So I'll leave it there, and do read that, because it is a most beautiful sutta, and it's not difficult. About 9 pages of very easy reading and lots of brilliant advice from the Buddha to Sigala.
Oh, it hasn't appeared by magic. I didn't write it down. So to finish off, I'd like to talk about the Buddha's encounters with a chap called, a wanderer called Vachagota. And the reason I want to do this is because I think the Buddha's encounters with Vachagota, what he says to Vachagota, really illustrate very well the way the Buddha really tailored his advice to the particular person he was talking to, their temperament, their starting point, what they were about. Even when that caused almost like contradictions, like he seems to be giving opposite advice to two different people. So firstly, yeah, it's a very, very good example of the Buddha tailoring his advice. And secondly, I think Vachagota is a bit like me. And actually, I think Vachagota is a bit like a lot of us in the modern world, in the contemporary West. So I think what the Buddha says and the way the Buddha gears what he teaches to Vacchagotta actually is relevant to me and quite a few others that I know in the West. So Vacchagotta seems to have been originally a fire worshipper. Ceremonial worship of fire was an important part of Vedic ritual, apparently. The fire god Agni was one of the most important gods in the Rig Veda. And it seems likely that Vacchagotta started out as a Brahmin worshipper of Agni. But Vacchagotta was also a wanderer. He was a wanderer, a bit like the Buddha had been a wanderer. He had left home and devoted himself entirely to his spiritual quest, sleeping rough, begging for his food. According to the commentaries, he came from a really well-off family, well-off Brahmin family. So, he sacrificed everything. He sacrificed everything to really follow his spiritual life as he saw it. And although Vacchagotta started out as a worshipper of Agni and a fire worshipper, he obviously wasn't satisfied with the Brahmin tradition. It obviously didn't give him the answers he was looking for. And although he wasn't a Buddhist, or at least he didn't start out as a Buddhist, he was obviously fascinated by the Buddha. He obviously saw that the Buddha had got something that he really wanted. He obviously thought, this guy's got some of the answers to some of my questions. And in fact, the Buddha did give him the answer to some of his questions, but not at all in the way that Vacchagotta expected. So Vacchagotta was a serious chap, he was a serious practitioner, and the Buddha seemed to have had a lot of time for him, actually, or at least the Buddha spent a lot of time with him, because Vacchagotta crops up several times in the Pali Canon and has quite long discourses with the Buddha, discussions. And in these discussions, what Vacchagotta does is he asks a lot of questions about the nature of things, the big questions. Vacchagotta is a thinker. He wants to understand the universe so that he knows what his life is about, so that he can live meaningfully. He's not just content to do it the way everybody's done it. He wants to know what it's about. He wants to know the answer to life. He wants to know, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. What's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? So when Vacchagotta meets the Buddha, he asks him the big questions. In one sutta, he asks, is the universe finite or is it infinite? Will the universe last forever or is it going to end? Is the soul the same thing as the body, or is the soul different from the body? What happens after death, especially what happens to an enlightened being after death? Does an enlightened being continue to exist after death, or does an enlightened being cease to exist after death? And to each of these questions, the Buddha replies, it would not be true to say one thing, and it would not be true to say the other. It would not be true to say that the soul and the body are the same thing, and it would not be true to say that the soul and the body are different things. It would not even be true to say both or neither. It wouldn't be true to say that a Buddha continues to exist after death, and it wouldn't be true to say that a Buddha ceases to exist after death. To which Vacchagotta replies, now I'm really confused. He says, I am mystified and confused, and the satisfaction I had gained through my previous conversations with Gautama is now completely gone. To which the Buddha replies, of course you're confused, Vacha. Of course you're confused. The nature of things is deep, hard to understand, beyond words and logic, subtle, peaceful, beautiful. Only the very wise see the real nature of things. Only those close to enlightenment see the real nature of things. And they see it by direct vision, not by philosophical theories about it, expressed in words. They see it because their minds are so clarified and purified that they are aligned with reality, which most of us are not. And then the Buddha goes on to tell Vacchagotta that trying to sort of get somewhere by finding the answer to these questions through words and opinions and logic, what the Buddha calls views. This is not going to get Vajragota anywhere. It's going to tie him in knots. The Buddha describes all these different viewpoints as bondage to a view, getting bogged down in views, which he says won't help Vajragota one jot. Okay, so why does the Buddha refuse to give a straight answer to these questions? Okay, I'm taking a risk here, but I'm going to say it's because to the enlightened mind, these questions don't make sense. They don't accord with, the words used don't accord with any reality. To ask these questions might be a bit like asking, well, if the sky fell, would it knock down our house? Or, where does the rainbow end? We tend to think that because we have a word for something, that something has a meaning, has a real existence. But the sky and the rainbow don't have any real existence. They don't have an independent existence anyway. They exist in the eye of the beholder as much as they exist in the outside world. And I think the Buddha is saying that the same thing is true of all the words we use when it comes to questions that go beyond our usual experience of time and space. We're not referring to real things. Those words don't mean anything. The truth is beyond words. So an analogy that's sometimes used for this is the relationship between a map and the territory that the map represents. Maps are very simplified, symbolic ways of representing the lay of the land. They're useful, they're really useful for finding our way around, but we need them. But looking at a map is not a substitute for experiencing what's really there on the ground. So if we are in Rio de Janeiro, for example, and we spend our time looking at a road map of Rio, that is not the same as feeling the heat, listening to the music, eating the food, smelling the smells, etc., etc. It would be very silly if we did that. So we use the map to get around, but we don't mistake it for the reality. And ideas, I think, are like that. We need ideas about the world. We need accurate ideas about the world. We need accurate maps. But the minute we start mistaking them for the reality, we're a bit lost. And Vajragota, as I think, he's a bit of an intellectual. Maybe he's mistaking getting the right map for actually experiencing the reality. So in effect, what the Buddha is saying to Vajragota, and to us, if we're a bit like him, is to have a bit of intellectual humility, realise you're not going to figure out the nature of the universe with your mind, put less emphasis on ideas and more on practice, more on doing, less on what you think you know about things, more on what you are. The universe is a lot more complex and mysterious than our theories about it, than the theories our little brains can encompass. Any explanation that tidies the universe up into neat little boxes is just too limited. If we think the universe was made by a god, or if we think the universe is just a meaningless conglomeration of matter and everything that happens is purely meaningless, or even if we think the universe is governed by the five niyamas for the cognoscenti, that's too neat. Okay, it doesn't cover all the bases. So the Buddha seems to be saying to Vajragota, you're an intelligent chap, but you need to see the limits of rational thought. Don't mistake the map for the territory. Don't focus so much on having the right clever ideas. At the same time, the Buddha's not telling us to abandon the intellect. He made a point that we need right view. We need accurate maps. But we mustn't, and the Dharma gives us very accurate maps for how to live, but we mustn't mistake those for the reality. And then there's another very interesting sutta, where the Buddha is very concerned to give Vajragota the map that's going to be right for him. It's going to be useful for him. Or maybe it's a bit like, because it takes into account where Vajragota is. It's a bit like the sat-nav on a car. It's not much use even having the right map if you think you're in the wrong place. And Vajragota is in a particular place. So, in this sutta, Vajragota asks another big question. He asks, is there a self? Maybe he's heard that the Buddha teaches that there isn't, there's a non-self. So he asks, is there a self? And this time, instead of even saying yes and no, the Buddha just refuses to answer. He just stays stum. So Buddha refuses to answer, and Vacchagotta says, well, come on, Gautama, I mean, is there a self? Is there a self? Don't just sit there. Again, the Buddha just sits in silence. Vacchagotta asks again, presumably getting more and more irritated. The Buddha is just not having it. He just refuses to answer, no matter how many times Vacchagotta asks the question. He isn't going to open his mouth on this subject. So Vacchagotta goes off in disgust. And when he's gone, the Buddha's companion Ananda asks the Buddha, what's going on? What's that about? Why didn't you answer him? Why wouldn't you answer him? And the Buddha answers, if I had told Vacchagotta that there was a self, he would have taken it to mean that I was agreeing with the traditional view that we have an eternal, unchanging soul. This would have been to stray into the philosophical view of eternalism. But if I had told Vacchagotta that there was no such thing as the self, it would have seemed to him that I was agreeing with the nihilistic view that we have no soul, that consciousness is not real, that nothing in us continues after death, that spiritual values are just human delusions, that the universe is meaningless. And if I'd given Vacchagotta the idea, that he had no self, it would have been very, very bad for him. It would have been disastrous for his spiritual life. And the translator of this sutta, on Access to Insight, great website, on Access to Insight, the translator of this sutta in his introduction says, he makes a very interesting point. He says, modern Western readers who read this sutta think that this just applies to Vacchagotta, that it doesn't apply to them. They think Vacchagotta is just a bit dim, and they aren't. So although he was a really committed spiritual practitioner, and they probably live a perfectly ordinary worldly life, he's a bit dim, but no self is good for them. Not going to be harmful for them. But in fact, Sangha Night, the founder of our order, the Buddha, loads of Buddhist figures throughout history have all really pointed out that the no-self doctrine can be very, very dangerous and very, very harmful unless it's understood correctly, unless we're ready for it. Sangha, for example, says not to believe in the reality of our soul is spiritual suicide. He says, of course we have a self, a soul, if you like. We have a pattern of awareness and volitions that has a certain pattern and continuity, even if it changes over time. We have an inner life that can grow and develop, or that can go bad. We need to take that inner life seriously. We need to cultivate it. We need to, if we deny its reality, we lose the path. The great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna says, it is better to have a self-view as big as Mount Meru than a wrong view of non-self. He says that the view of non-self is like a poisonous snake. If you pick it up wrongly, it'll kill you. And we're not very good at picking up poisonous snakes. We don't come across them very often in the West. So I think we ought to listen to Nagarjuna. In Buddhism, ideas aren't taken as absolute truth, and no self is just the same. It's a map, it's a teaching, it's a skillful means to help us. It can be very helpful, it can be harmful. The idea of no self is very helpful if it makes us aware of how dependent we are on others, how interrelated we are with others, so that we become less self-centered, more concerned with others and the world around us, less concerned uniquely with ourselves. It makes us more grateful, more connected to others and the world around us. If it does all that, it's useful to us. It's harmful if it leads us to think, for example, we have no free will, that we don't matter because we don't really exist, that our ethics doesn't matter, that our karma doesn't matter. That our inner life doesn't matter, that we are not powerful spiritual beings who can make a real impact on the world. If it leads us to think that, it's really harmful. It's harmful if we think it's the be-all and end-all of the spiritual life. It can really derail us if we think it means we don't have to do things like develop a positive emotion. All we have to do is somehow see non-selfhood. Really harmful. So when it comes to giving spiritual advice to Vacchagotta, the Buddha clearly thinks this is non-self is the wrong map for this chap. It's not the map he needs, given where he's at. So he customises the teaching to the individual. Okay, he taught non-self to some people, but he doesn't want to do that with Vacchagotta. And for many of us, I think, with the sort of starting point we've been given by our society, the ideas we've got, and the sort of emotional coldness of our society, I think putting too much emphasis on non-self might be just as harmful as it would have been for Vacchagotta. Instead of thinking of destroying the self, we might far better think in terms of developing a strong and healthy self, I think. A strong, emotionally healthy self, strong positive emotions, strong ethical sense, strong commitment to our purpose in life, strong friendships, strong sense of loyalty to the Sangha and to the Buddhist tradition. Sangha is where non-self really manifests, I think, where we really go beyond self, where we start thinking not so much of me and my insights as us and us moving more towards enlightenment as a community. That's really non-self. I think it might be better, instead of thinking of destroying the self, for us to think of expanding the self to include more and more other people, more and more of the world around us, so that in the end we think of everybody and everything as ourself. We have that sort of identification. We care as much for others and things that we don't own as we do for ourselves and the things we do own. That would be a far more positive and useful way of practicing, and safe way of practicing, than focusing too much, I think, on oneself. So I think that teaching to Vacchagotta's got something to say to us. And just to finish off, I should say that in the end, in case you're wondering, Vacchagotta did become a follower of the Buddha, which was a very good thing.